Please hear these words of the Reverend David Blanchard as your call to worship. Come down off the ladder. Wash out that paintbrush. Shake the sand out of your shoes. Get up off your muddy knees and give the garden a morning off. Fold up the newspaper, turn off the coffee pot, close up your calendar, already filled with dates and times and people and places that claim you. This church is ready for you to fill its rooms, to create its spirit, to generate its warmth, to kindle its light. This church is ready for you to make community, to create beauty, to bend it toward justice, to serve its ideals. This church is ready for you to be here, honoring our past, invigorating our present, and dreaming our future. This is your church. Here we are home. Here we are whole. Let us begin.
A lesson for the day. Long ago, long ago, the great Baal Shem Tov felt a need to intercede with heaven, to pray to God for the deliverance of the people whose lives were threatened. And so he went to a certain place in the forest, and there he built the fire, and he said the special prayer. And the miracle occurred, and the people were saved. Time passed, and more time passed, and it fell to his disciple, Moses of Sassov, to also intercede with heaven. And he too went to the place in the forest, and he knelt and prayed and said, Lord, I don't know how to build the fire, but I know the prayer and I know the place. This must be sufficient. And it was. Still more time passed. And yet again, in the ways of the world, misfortune threatened the people once more, and it was Magid Mezrich's turn to intercede with heaven. And he too went to the place in the forest, and he said, Lord, I don't know how to build a fire. I don't even know the prayer, but I know the place. This must be enough. And it was. The people were again saved. Centuries passed. More time. More misfortune fell people around the world, and it fell to Israel, Ritzim, to once again pray to God for help. And he sat in his study, his head held in his hands, and said, Lord God, I do not know where to go in the forest. I don't know how, and I know nothing of fires. I don't even remember the prayer. But I know the story of how you've saved the people. This must be enough. And it was sufficient. Here ends the first lesson. Writings of my colleague, Victoria Safford. Our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope, not the prudent gates of optimism, which are somewhat narrower, nor the stalwart gates of common sense, nor the strident gates of self-righteousness, which creak on shrill and angry hinges. People cannot hear us there. They cannot pass through. Nor the cheerful, flimsy gates of everything's gonna be all right. But a different and sometimes lonely place, the place of truth-telling about your own soul first. Truth-telling about your own soul first of all and its condition. Then the place of resistance and defiance, the piece of ground from which you see the world both as it is, as it could be, as it will be. The place from which you glimpse not only the struggle, but the joy in the struggle. This concludes the second lesson of the day. This is the mission of our faith, to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness that we must hold the whole world in our hands and our heart. This is the mission of our faith. I am delighted to be with you today. It's a true joy to come and work with a congregation that is solid and healthy and eager to embrace its dreams. That's such a thrill for me. You'll forgive me for correcting my introduction. I'd forgotten the timing of things. Yesterday was the 44th anniversary of my ordination into our ministry. I'm way too young a man for that to be true. But I've been sort of reflective on 44 years and serving congregations of all sizes, and in this particular role that I now share, serving the larger faith and its diversity and its health and its struggles. And I've asked myself, what helps me go on? Through all the troubles, where do I find hope to go on? So believing that you should know the outcome of the sermon at the beginning, here it is. You don't have to listen after this. Our faith teaches that love is our core enterprise, that we should learn how to love one another. And to love one another means we have to live that first principle at every opportunity, to show respect for all people. And I want to expand it to say, to show respect for all living beings. And even further, to show respect for this whole earth that is our responsibility. I have listened to people praying time and again for somebody, somewhere, to come and save us. And I sit in my study and hold my hand and say, oh, Lord, I have no idea how to build a fire. I don't know what the prayer is. I have no idea what to do. Help. Help. Yo. And then I realize it is finally in my hands and in my heart, and by extension, yours. So what gives me hope is the recognition that you and I have the capacity, the very skills necessary to redeem and save the world from its misfortune. Do you believe that? I hope so. If you don't, think about it. But before I go on, let me ask you just a couple of quick illustrations. What gives you hope? Just short sentence. What gives you hope? Anyone? Children, yes. A hug. Oh, bless you. Sunrises. Flowers. I'm sorry? Love. And well, I'm sorry, one more, a little louder. A good deed? Yes. All right. Emily Dickinson once said that hope is a thing with feathers to suggest how delicate the enterprise of hope is. What gives you hope to keep on keeping on? What helps you when you are troubled at every turn? Have you noticed, and forgive me, I don't mean to be a downer here, but have you noticed that the world is going to hell in a handbasket? What a year we have had. My goodness gracious. What is happening in our society? This tawdry political campaign has just embarrassed us and perhaps given proof to that argument that democracy is the worst form of government. Save all others. It has had the happy effect of bringing a greater voter turnout, so we'll be thankful for that. The people's voice will be heard somehow. But even however the election turns out on November 9th, we will still have a society that is having trouble being a common weal, a common good, to have a sense of itself as a common body, unified in all its diversity. And so there's much work before us to rebuild and recreate a society that is, quite frankly, in some kind of disintegration is way too large a word, but some kind of trouble. More than 30,000 people a year are injured with handguns and die. This last year was the hottest year recorded ever around the world. We read in the headlines every day the terrible things that are happening in the Middle East with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Boko Haram in Africa, and the terrible things human beings do to one another. We pick up the paper one Sunday morning and discover there's been this terrible shooting in Orlando. And then here in Dallas, shortly thereafter, and Shreveport. Was it Shreveport? Boca Raton. No, that's Florida. Help me here. Baton Rouge. I travel too much. We teach here that love matters, and yet the world around us seems to be clinging to the gates of self-righteousness and anger and fear and hatred. There are nearly 900 identified hate groups in the United States, characterized by their vilification of those who have been historically marginalized among us. Blacks, Latinas, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered individuals. And now the latest scapegoat group, immigrants, particularly Muslims. I kept asking myself, people said that, President Obama is really a Muslim in disguise, and I want to say, what's wrong with that? Why is that a problem? But as I drive around here, a newbie, and I see all these huge mega congregations, and I listen to your leadership talk about this being an oasis. As I said, an oasis from what desert? And it's the perceived sense that Orthodox Christianity is an oppressive force just in your own community, and it is frightened of theological diversity. And we gather here to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, that somehow we can listen to each other with enough care and respect to gain a better sense of the truth. But I wonder, is it possible for a whole society to decline? A lot of historic examples. At the First World War, William Butler Yeats had this to say: things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosened everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely a second coming is at hand. A second coming of what? What rough beast slouches towards Bethlehem? Are we awaiting some Savior? Somehow that the heavens will open up and all our problems will be delivered from us? I want to tell you that's a false hope. Whether you like it or not, the hope of the world rests right here in your hands, my hands. And the danger we have is making our work too small. I love the balloons. And I love that you have the two floating up there talking about your hopes and your dreams for yourself, but I love even more that one balloon went into the sky to say we are committed to holding the whole world. And that's a big challenge. And how can you possibly hold the whole world? Well, you can't. You simply can't. You have to hold the world where you can, when you can, all the time. I am not a pious man. You wouldn't know that looking at me. Well, maybe you would. And so, this notion of getting on my knees and praying has never worked for me. But I do have a quiet little prayer. If I were more pious, I'd say it more intentionally, more often, but it goes something like this. Oh Lord, I have no idea who that is or what that is. Oh Lord, help me not to add to the harm of the world this day. Well, that's a tall order. Just think about it for a moment. Every time I'm cut off in traffic, I realize that love is only a teaching, not a command. But then I go on and with genuine humility say thank you. Meister Eckhart once said, if thank you is the only prayer you ever utter, it'll be sufficient. Like telling a good story will be sufficient if it opens up your heart. And then if I'm feeling really bold, so Lord, help me do some good today. And then I'll recognize the arrogance of that statement, and I'll add the semicolon, but let me get out of your way. That is to say, don't let me be an impediment to the goodness that this world still has for us around. Let me be its helpmate. I cannot solve all the world's problems, and neither can you, but each of us can be a helpmate in bringing about the redeemed society of love, care, and justice. We can do that. One of the things we teach with my team today is the importance of our congregations to understand themselves to be kind of an experimental lab, where you come together with all the habits of the world contaminating your soul, and you try to get clear about how you've been taken over by your own insecurities, your own fears, your own righteous angers, your own sort of, it won't make a big difference, anything I do, and come to terms with you have a precious life. How will you live it? Are you living in keeping with your ideals, your hopes, and your dreams? And to practice creating here the kind of community that you would like to see out there. To create here the community of love and justice, of redemption and care, of atonement, forgiveness, and reconciliation here that you would like to see out there. So you can practice and get good at it. I make jokes about being cut off in traffic, but I get cut off in lots of other ways in our society, and I'm sure you do too, where your humanity is diminished and disregarded and not treated with respect. How do you learn to respect yourself when that happens over and over again, particularly if you're part of that so-called marginalized community of people who've been historically discriminated against? How do you regain hope and self-respect? You come here to learn how to be loved and how to love in turn. You come here to learn that the difficulties of the world are not the whole story. I can get very despairing if I read the headlines of any given paper, but the truth of the matter is tomorrow morning, most of the world's people will get up and go about their business trying to support their families or themselves. They will try to do a little bit of good. They will try to be active citizens. And most people in the world will go home at night at peace with themselves and with their neighbors and with their families. The reason the news is so filled with awful stuff is because that's the aberration. The goodness that we do every day is taken for granted. And I'm saying we need to learn how to take that stuff for granted and make it explicit and teach each other the fragile arts of hospitality. Now, what keeps us from doing this? We think we've got all the time in the world to do it. Oh, it's sort of like your diet program. I'll start in January. It's your exercise program. Oh, I'll get on to that on Monday, not today. I freely admit my guilt here. We can defer and become complacent, and over time we don't even recognize what has happened to us. Rather than going to hell in a handbasket, I sometimes think of the world as more like the frogs in a warm pot. You throw a frog into a hot boiling pot and it'll hop right out again. But if you put it in a cold pot and you just gradually warm it, what happens? You adapt. The frog adapts, and pretty soon you're steamed. and you're cooked. And a little butter and a little garlic. Seriously. This is the thing that we must guard about. We need to create a healthy sense of urgency to our ministry, that what we do here is not just because it's fun, it's nice people, but rather we are trying to change who we are and how we are, and to learn how better to live those values we subscribe to and take them out into the world. When you leave here, you leave the sanctuary to go back into the profane world. And it's your job, I tell you, it's your job at every moment to find a way to redeem it. Now, that sounds like I'm asking a lot, and I am. That's why you have a church, because you can't do it by yourself. That's why I have a colleague minister, because I can't do it by myself either. But I remind myself I don't have to. I am not the Messiah. I'm just your partner, being a helper to you, and you're a helper to me. And so here's a story, because I think stories are where we find most of our hope. This is a true story. It comes from the writings of a poet by the name of Naomi Shihab Nye. She's a Palestinian poet. It's a story of what happened to her at the Albuquerque airport one day. And her writing is so beautiful, I'm just going to read it to you. Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal after learning my flight had been delayed 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like the one my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing. "Help," said the flight agent. "Talk to her. What's her problem? We told her that the flight was delayed, and then she did this." A lot of anxiety in that moment. I stooped and put my arm around the woman and spoke haltingly, "I need your forgiveness in advance for my inability to pronounce Palestinian. Shudo shubiduk habiti stani shwe min fidik shubit siwe," or something like that. The minute she heard any word she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought her flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for a major medical treatment the next day. I said, "No, we're fine. You'll get there, just late. Who's picking you up? We'll call him." We called her son. I spoke with him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother until she got on the plane. She talked to him, and then we called her other sons just for the fun of it. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some of my Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This all took 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling about her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She'd pulled a sack of homemade mamoul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, from her bag and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single traveler declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo, we were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. Then the airline broke out some apple juice, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving it. They too were covered with powdered sugar. And I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green, furry leaves. Such an old, country traveling tradition. Always carry a plant, always stay rooted somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in, the shared world. Not a single person in that gate, once the crying of confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This still can happen. Not everything is lost. This still can happen. Let it begin here. Blessings on your ministry in the years to come. Thank you.